Order, order. Welcome to this morning's evidence session with the Secretary of State for Transport. It's the latest in a series of regular sessions we hold with the Secretary of State, putting questions to her about policy across her department's remit and following up on some of our previous work. So, please introduce yourselves.
Good morning. Thanks ever so much for the invitation to come and speak to you again, Chair. I'm Heidi Alexander. I'm the Secretary of State for Transport.
And I'm Shanmugalingam, the Permanent Secretary.
Welcome. So you appeared in front of us in November last year. So could you very briefly summarise what have been the main achievements that you've managed to progress since you last came, and any key areas where you've not been able to progress as you would have wished?
Thanks, Chair. And can I just actually start by saying thank you to you and the committee for all of the work that you have done to support the many changes that we're making to the transport system, particularly on the railways bill. Your recommendations were very helpful in that respect. I think in terms of progress, we're making good progress on improving public transport, in investing in our roads, and also in enabling the transition to cleaner and healthier journeys for people across the country. I'd highlight a few areas. If you look at the work that we've done on rail, we've frozen rail fares for the first time in 30 years. That was introduced in March of this year and runs until March of next year. We're running more services. We're seeing passenger numbers still increasing on the railways. We're seeing fewer cancellations, and we're obviously making progress with a number of large infrastructure schemes, including things like the Transpennine route upgrade. And we set out plans for Northern Powerhouse Rail in January, which I think was long awaited. And when it comes to the buses, I've been particularly pleased that we've been able to fund the rollout of more zero emission buses, maintaining the £3 bus fare cap, and have got plans to make buses more affordable for families this summer. Good that we have published the Better Connected strategy, which is the integrated national transport strategy as well. But I'm really focused on the bread and butter issues that I know that people are concerned about, making sure that we fix our broken roads, use the record £7.3 billion that we've given to local authorities as effectively and as efficiently as we can. We've launched a structures fund. We've also published the road safety strategy, which I think was much needed after a period of 12 years when there hadn't been an update. And then good progress as well with things like record months for electric car sales, making sure that we're progressing the rollout of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles as well. And then I was particularly pleased last week to launch the third cycling and walking investment strategy with a real focus on how we can get more children walking and cycling to school. On the more negative side, obviously the situation with HS2 is still very challenging. We've reset the programme. We have de-scoped the programme to reduce risk in it as well, so that we won't be running trains at 360 kilometres per hour. It would be 320, which would still mean they go as fast as the Japanese bullet train. On rail performance, I would say that whilst we are making progress across the country, in some areas performance could be better when it comes to reliability, and I'd want to see more progress on that. And on the issue of driving test wait times, it's still too high for people, and we need to get that down.
Okay, well, all of that we will be picking up on, I think just about all of that. In terms of the next 6 months, what are your key priorities, rather than a whole list of actions? What's a very small number of top priorities for you? And more importantly, or as importantly, are you confident that you've got adequate resources to deliver those?
So I think what's different about me being before you today compared to 6 months ago is obviously the impact of the conflict in the Middle East and the pressure that has put on prices associated with fuel. And if I wasn't focused on what that meant for drivers, for operators of public transport, both buses, rail, but also the airlines, then I'm not sure I would be doing my job properly. And so that's a major focus, because whilst there's been positive news in terms of a peace agreement, the impact of the disruption to oil coming out of the Straits of Hormuz will have a very long economic tail. So that's a big priority for me still over the next 6 months. But that shouldn't distract me from the day job, and I think the 3 main priorities that we've got around ensuring that the transport system supports economic growth and enhances people's everyday experience of the place where they live is really important. So we will be, when it comes to economic growth, consulting on a revised Heathrow expansion national policy statement over the summer, and very grateful to you, Chair, for setting aside time for the committee to scrutinise that as well in the autumn. I do want to maintain a focus on how we achieve value for money from roads investment. £7.3 billion going to local councils to do preventative road resurfacing, fix potholes. That money needs to be spent efficiently and effectively. I'm still very focused on improving public transport, and so we need to make a success of the Kids Go Free bus offer in the summer, which is going to mean that children between the age of 5 and 15 can travel for free on the buses. And then, of course, we are still progressing with bringing the train operating companies into public ownership. We've got Chiltern happening in September, Great Western in December, and I would like to make progress on getting the first phase of East West Rail into service as well. So they're a personal priority for me. You don't want me to give a long list, so I'll stop there.
Okay,
perhaps
right.
Jo might pick up on the resourcing issue.
Yeah, so obviously we have our spending review settlement, but in terms of the capacity of the department, we've made quite significant changes over the last year. We are about 15% sort of smaller in terms of the number of people we employ. That's a mixture of 2 things. Structural efficiencies. We had a voluntary exit scheme at this time last year, and as we may come on to later, we've also moved some staff to DFT operator, and we'll move some further to Network Rail as part of the transition to Great British Railways. My focus now is making sure we are as efficient and effective as we can be to make sure we deliver the Secretary of State's priorities.
Lawrence, you've got a question around resources, I think.
There have been a number of reports, and good morning, that there may be changes to the departmental budget as a result of the need to fund the Defence Investment Plan. Are those reports accurate, and what level of change might we be talking about?
So I hope you will understand that I'm not going to get into detailed commentary on speculation that we've seen in the media, and the government will be setting out its approach to the Defence Investment Plan shortly, and we will detail the approach to funding as part of that. I do think it's right, as a responsible government, as the priorities and threats change in the world. We have obviously got the conflict in Ukraine, we've had the conflict in the Middle East as well. I think it's right that the government considers the balance of spending, but I hope you will appreciate that these are live discussions, and it's too early to say because those discussions haven't concluded across government.
And if there was to be a change in the spending review settlement, what would your priorities be in terms of which programmes to protect?
So I really don't want to get drawn in the detail of this, because I think as soon as I say that I protect one thing, the question will be, well, you're not protecting something else. And so I hope you'll forgive me if this answer isn't as clear as the ones that I would normally seek to give you. We do have a large capital budget as a department, second only to that of the Ministry of Defence. Now, what I would say is that a lot of the schemes that we are progressing with, many are already in contract. Many are actually already in construction, and so we are limited in terms of the changes that we can make to our capital programme. I want to ensure that we protect the things that improve the everyday experience for people of everyday journeys, I'm acutely conscious that we have a very big maintenance and renewals challenge at the moment, whether that's on our roads with motorways that were predominantly built in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And also when you look at local roads, we're all aware of the maintenance challenges there. But equally on the rail network, to ensure that we can provide resilience, we do have to make sure that we continue to invest in renewals and maintenance. Now, there are questions about funds that have yet to be allocated to specific schemes. And so when the Prime Minister says to me, actually, the scale of spending that we need for the defence and national security of our country is bigger than we anticipated 12, 18 months ago, I think as a responsible member of the Cabinet in a G7 nation, I should look hard at what funds I have yet to allocate and whether there are any adjustments and tweaks that can be made. But of course we've also got processes to go through in the department each year when we do business planning and planning for the next year. We've got another spending review coming up where we will need to get into the detail of that.
Thank you. Chair, I'm conscious of time, so happy to move
thank
on.
you. We've had the department's estimates laid in April, and we were told this was going to be accompanied by a strategic plan, which is outlining the department's objectives and intended outcomes funded at spending review. So why has that still not been published? And even if we can't see it, what can we learn from it?
Do you want to pick that?
Yes, of course. Yes, we published the main estimates and the main estimates memorandum in April, and thank you also to the committee and the clerks for help with simplifying how we present our main estimates to make them as helpful as possible.
Well, if it's not clear to us, it isn't clear to people
exactly.
in general. So.
As clear as possible to everybody. Strategic plans, the Cabinet Office, I think as we discussed last time with the Outcome Delivery Plan, they publish all departmental plans together. We hope and expect that they will do that shortly. I think if you look at the main estimates memorandum, it's got how we are spending our money, and it's also got critically our performance metrics. So for each of our strategic outcomes, enhancing growth in place, we list there the performance metrics which we will then report against in our annual report and accounts. When you see the strategic plan, the additional bits will be a bit more explanation of why those strategic objectives, what we are seeking to achieve. Obviously the main estimates memorandum is about our spend, so our plans for all the other levers we have as government, and then brief information on our evaluation plan, our principal risks, and how we approach project delivery. But the heart of the substance is as already set out in the main estimates memorandum, but I very much hope the plans will be published shortly. I'm afraid it's not something we can control.
Okay.
They're published all together by the Cabinet Office for all departments.
Right. Okay. And are they for the current financial year?
Yes, exactly.
Which we're already well into, and we haven't seen them yet. Okay. Makes it difficult for scrutiny, but thank you very much. Right, Steph.
Thank you. Integrated transport. We heard from expert witnesses that welcome the Better Connected strategy, but there wasn't quite enough clarity on how it's actually going to be delivered. I wonder if I can start by asking Jo, actually, what changes you're making to the way the department is organised in order to deliver on that strategy.
Yeah, so we have 40 commitments in Better Connected. We have a senior civil servant allocated responsibility for each of those. We therefore track and monitor progress against each of the commitments. Our strategy and policy committee looked in February at our overall implementation plan. We're also looking at the monitoring and evaluation plan within the department shortly. We're also sort of changing how we work, so particularly we might come back to integrated ticketing, bringing together the different bits of the department that can make that real difference to the support we can provide as central government to enable local areas to provide the integrated ticketing services that they want and need.
Thank you. Now, clearly part of the integration may be some, shall we say, gentle integration of budget lines within the Department of Transport, but it's bigger than that, isn't it? We heard one evidence contribution in our hearing from a witness who said that we think the Swiss can afford integrated transport because they're a rich country. Actually, they'd say they're a rich country because they have excellent integrated transport. Secretary of State, what are you doing to lobby for the cause of integrated transport with other departments in particular? Because this is a big potential game changer, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I think the key themes of Better Connected are all about people, place and partnership, because the reality of the transport system that most people will experience in the country will often be determined by the role that the local transport authority, the council plays, or if people are living in big city regions or combined authority areas, the policies and programmes of the mayors of those areas. And so that's why we chose those 3 themes for Better Connected. I do work very closely, particularly with MHCLG, Housing, Communities and Local Government, and Treasury. If you look at the work we did about the Northern Growth Strategy and the contribution that Northern Powerhouse Rail can play to that, we have embedded the rail infrastructure proposals to improve those connections in Yorkshire between cities like Sheffield, Leeds, Bradford, York as the first phase, that new railway between Manchester and Liverpool, and then improving cross Pennine connections further. That was all predicated on, well, actually, how can we support the financial square mile of the north of England in Leeds, both through rail improvements, but also making sure it's properly integrated with Mayor Tracy Brabin's plans for West Yorkshire mass transit. How do we ensure that the regeneration around Manchester Piccadilly that would be enabled by the creation of a new station there and that new rail link, the link down to Manchester Airport. You can't just look at this in silos. You need to make sure that all parts of government are coming together to unlock the economic opportunity that new infrastructure can bring.
That feels thematically aligned to the concept of integrated transport. There's clearly lots of progress that can be made through better joined up working. This is also about investment and investment in growth. Governments can do a lot to limit economic growth. Very few things they can really do to deliver economic growth in reality, but transport, I would gently suggest, is one of them. Do you think the Treasury understands that case?
I do, and if you think about the £45 billion commitment that we have made for future decades, on Northern Powerhouse Rail, with over £1 billion to be spent in this spending review alone, I think the Chancellor does fully understand and appreciate the transformative effect that investment in transport infrastructure can play. And I'd highlight another area as an example of this. If you consider the planning permission that was granted for Universal Studios in Bedford in December of last year, our strategy around East-West Rail, linking Oxford and Cambridge with a new station at Stewartby, which will be the closest station to that theme park, a new station at Wixham's on the East Midland Main Line as well, improvements to the road infrastructure at the Black Cat Junction around there. We are looking at this in a holistic way and making sure that where government is investing money, it is also working with the private sector to unlock opportunity. And I think if you look at that Oxford to Cambridge growth corridor, the transport plans that underpin it, and the jobs opportunity that exists with something like Universal, making it a destination. We've granted planning permission for the expansion of Luton Airport as well, which will be the airport closest to that to actually drive inward tourism to the country. This is all of us, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, working with Housing, Communities and Local Government on the planning framework, working with Treasury to make sure the investments are there, but also making sure that people can get to and from a new destination such as Universal easily.
Thank you.
Thank you. Scott.
Morning. So many of our towns and cities are congested, and that has economic impact. I mean, Steph was just talking about the economy there. So does the government have a target of reducing non-essential car use?
So we haven't put a target in place, but what we've made clear through our Better Connected strategy is that we want to provide better choice for people to choose sustainable modes of travel. And if you look at the reform agenda that we have, whether it's on the railways with the establishment of Great British Railways and the investment in the rail network, whether it's about the improvements we want to make to the bus network. We want public transport, walking and cycling, active modes of travel, to be a better choice for people than having to always depend upon the car. Now, I'm acutely aware that actually it's very, very different in different parts of the country. I remember a conversation with my own husband about the fact that we'd get rid of our car when we lived in London. I then got selected as the candidate in Swindon South, and actually, if I'm being totally honest, the quality of the public transport network in the town that I represent would make it very hard for me to do my job did I not have a car. And so if you look at what we're doing, whether it's through Better Connected or through the cycling and walking investment strategy, where we want to invest in things like safer crossings, safer cycle routes, so that we can get to a place where people can swap out some short car journeys that they're doing in towns and cities.
The question was about overall targets, and rather than, we all know what choices are available.
Yeah.
It's what's the government's aspiration in terms of, particularly in the context of an expectation of 10% increase in road traffic across all modes and 12% on the SRN. Now, that's just going to deliver more and more congestion, which doesn't exactly help economic growth. So is that an intention, an expectation of government, that increase?
So we are also enhancing the road network. If you think about...
You mean adding capacity?
In some places, yes.
But I think the question is that the right thing to do?
If I take the example of the Lower Thames crossing, for example, which is a strategic freight route with lorries that come over into the port of Dover, need to make a journey up to the Midlands and the North. I actually think we do need additional capacity there, and it's right that we make that investment, working with the private sector to relieve the huge congestion that you see around the Dartford crossing. And there will be some interventions that we make through the roads investment strategy that will actually provide some further capacity on key choke points on the road network. I think it's right that we do that where it is essential, where new development is happening, whether that's new residential development, new commercial development. You obviously need to be able to support the journeys that development
there's always
requires.
going to be those locations where you can justify improvements, but 12% across the board seems incredible. I mean, do you think Swindon could take 12% more traffic? I hate to make it about your constituency.
So that's why I say that what we have set out through all of the work that we're doing, highlighted in the Integrated National Transport Strategy and Better Connected, is to prioritise improvements in sustainable forms of travel. So prioritise improvement in public transport. That's why, going back to the former discussion, we are investing heavily in the rail network to improve connectivity and capacity. It's why we're investing over £3 billion in improving bus services, that money that goes to local transport authorities to support the bus network, and it's why we're giving leaders more control over defining local bus services. If they want to go down the route of franchising, setting up a municipal bus operator, they can do. And so, look, I think the whole focus of what this government has done over the last 2 years is about delivering a better public transport system that will be more attractive for people, more affordable for people. Let's not forget that first rail fares freeze in 30 years. We've got the £3 bus fare cap in place. I want people to feel enabled to do more short trips in towns and cities using sustainable forms of travel. I also think in rural areas, if you look at what we suggested in Better Connected, we're doing a pilot in the Hope Valley, which is called Mini Switzerland, which is about integrating the basics of timetables, because if you want to use the train to get somewhere, but you can't rely upon the bus turning up to get you there, then you're going to perhaps be more minded to use a car. And so, that's the focus of what we're doing.
So all that's great, and we love it all, but when we get to 2035, the prediction is that car use is going to increase by 12%. That feels like failure, despite all this fantastic work.
So, look,
do you think that's success? 12% more cars on the roads in 2035?
But do you not accept that that's going to create more congestion? I've been in London since the M25 opened, and as a community leader I once worked with once said, it's like, well, we don't have seeds in Trafalgar Square anymore, but when you throw seeds out to pigeons, there's always more pigeons than there is seeds. So, at a time of constrained supply and unlimited demand, any increase in capacity is going to end up with congestion. Now, I accept why the logic for the Lower Thames crossing, but by accepting this forecast suggests that the only expectation is to keep increasing capacity on our roads, rather than looking at rather than actually having calculations and predict and plans for that level of modal shift in order to contain that gross in forecast demand. No?
So I'll repeat again what I've previously said, and that is, I've got no intention of telling people how they should travel, and I'm not setting an overall traffic reduction target, but I do feel that lots of people, including myself, suffer from what you might call car dependency, and I think what the government is doing across its wide range of work, whether it's on rail, buses, walking and cycling, is actually about enabling choice and giving people more choice. And look, I'm more focused on, if I get to 2035 and I've got 60% of kids walking, cycling or scooting to school, that will have the knock-on consequence of reducing the number of people who are using their car for the school run. And so as a consequence of that, we could make progress towards tackling those shorter trips in towns and cities.
You're not amending the forecast. You're saying the forecast is the forecast.
Yes, we've just made very quickly. I think one of the changes Secretary of State has been key to across government is that what is traditionally called predict and provide on the road system, that is not the approach the government is taking. We have moved to this vision-led approach to transport planning and the integration for all those reasons the Secretary of State set out, at looking in particular areas about the government's overall ambitions, objectives, working with local leaders, and then making sure the transport system facilitates that, isn't just responding and sort of reacting, normally behind time to what is naturally happening. Through the transport system, we can shape those communities and we can shape the choices that people have.
Okay, Ollie, you wanted to come in briefly here and then I'll go back to Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a bit of a thought on this discussion we've been having. So it was good to hear what you said, Permanent Secretary, about trying to move away from predict and provide. I think most people who look at this stuff would suggest that has not been successful over the decades. Is there not a bit of a contradiction here? So the department's forecasting this 12% increase, and yet the government would not set a passenger growth target for the railways bill, which kind of suggests a real variance in thinking between modes. And also, when we had Lord Hendy before this committee a few weeks ago, when he was pressed by me, I will declare, about the Advanti West Coast summer service cuts, he was saying he wished other operators would do the same, almost suggesting that there's a poverty of ambition about a greater ability to fill vacant seats on the railway, which for long distance operators definitely does have a big opportunity to relieve pressure on the M6. So is there a bit of a contradiction in thinking here, or am I misunderstanding?
No, I don't think there is a contradiction. I think we're in danger of confusing two separate things. You use the example of not setting a passenger growth target on the railways and somehow suggest that is in contradiction to an estimate of where traffic may go in future. The reason why we haven't set a passenger growth target is that I think the only way in which you can, if you're complying with the duties of the railways bill, then a consequence of that will be to attract more people to the railways. Now, we've only got to cast our mind back 4 years to when COVID happened, and nobody could predict that coming. But usage of the railways plummeted overnight and no one was on it for understandable reasons. And so we could spend a lot of time setting targets. I'm more interested in practical interventions to actually attract people to public transport, and that's why we have focused our attention on affordability. Let's not forget that in the 14 years of the previous government, rail fares went up by 60%. We're the first government in 30 years to freeze it. It's why we've maintained a £3 bus fare cap and made that a priority. And so, look, I think judge us on our actions about what we're doing to attract people to the rail network, more direct connections for people, more services running. I think those are the actions of a government that is serious about promoting sustainable travel. And whilst I did reference some of the enhancements that we will be making to the road network through the Third Roads Investment Strategy, through things like the Lower Thames Crossing investment, we have also had to take the difficult decision to cancel a number of road schemes, which we did in the year after the general election. So I do think that there is, I think there's consistency to our approach. And I think the proof will actually be in the pudding in terms of how many people are using the railways, and those numbers are going up. We're seeing good feedback in terms of bus user passenger experience. Would I like more people back using the buses than that, which is currently the case? Of course. But I think our programme of reform can get us to that place in the years ahead.
Two questions. Is the economic cost of traffic congestion a factor in the Treasury's economic modelling? And two, and do we see those figures? And two is, are you going to be measuring modal shift? Are you going to be measuring in the integrated transport strategy who is shifting from which modes onto which modes by what rate and where?
I believe the economic costs of congestion are a consideration for the Treasury.
A consideration, but are they measured and reported?
And so Jo may know more detail.
We work very closely with the Treasury and share all of our analysis, our national transport model, which looks at both congestion but also how we then report through the official statistics on use of different modes by different groups of people for different purposes.
And measuring the modal shift, is that an expectation of the integrated transport strategy?
We haven't set out to measure modal shift, and so we are working on the way in which we monitor progress towards achieving those 40 commitments that are set out there. I think if we make good progress towards achieving those 40 commitments, then the result will be more people using public transport, more people choosing to walk or cycle more often.
Yeah. But I mean, Ollie gave us a very specific example of people who might shift from road to rail on the M6 given certain conditions and what it would take, and then measuring that. But I'll leave that there. Scott, let me come back to you.
It's quite incredible though. You've got, we think about active travel, we think of car use, rail, bus. There's lots of stuff happening, but there's no targets. It does seem, maybe I like a target too much, but do we need targets really to drive performance on this?
Look, I think, actually investing in the public transport network, which is what we're doing, is actually more likely to yield outcomes. If you take what the previous government did, for example, on their cycling and walking investment strategy, they had targets galore, but didn't hit them. And the reason why they didn't hit them was they took £200 million out of the active travel budget. And so I want to make sure that we are properly funding different parts of the public transport network so that people have a more reliable, more comfortable, more accessible, and ultimately more affordable experience. And that's why we've taken the decisions that we have done in the last couple of years. And we will monitor carefully progress against achieving those commitments in the Better Connected strategy. And I'm always happy to come back to this committee and talk more about it.
If it was helpful, we could provide the committee with a note on the National Travel Survey and the information that gives us and that we use within the department,
good,
about what people are, how people are travelling, but why. So we assess the reasons for different journeys, and that totally underpins the strategic decisions that we make. I'm happy to give that to the committee.
I mean, I was going to ask about modal targets, but I think you've answered
sorry,
that.
it's fine.
Very quickly, so National Highways plays a key role in both delivering major road schemes and also facilitating development at scale. It's a really important organisation. Do you think they're equipped to actually to deliver integrated transport as well? Because that's a key part of what's needed, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I think the National Highway is responsible for the strategic road network, and it is really important that what they are doing integrates properly with other modes of travel, whether that is mass transit in particular areas, whether it's rail. We've also, in the third roads investment strategy, introduced a dedicated fund to enable progress to be made on development sites that have been stalled. So this is a £165 million accelerator fund for growth and housing, because we do think that, you know, we do need to focus how we make those changes on the strategic road network to unlock those big development sites. So I think that's something positive moving forward. We do have new acting leadership in National Highways. At the moment, Nick Joyce has moved from the Department for Transport to act in that role temporarily, and you know, Joe and I have, you know, asked him as well to go in and give us his views on making sure that that organisation is set up for delivery.
Change the subject to fuel duty. So you talked earlier about, you know, £3 bus cap and freezing rail fares and all the rest of it. And another cost of living measure is freezing fuel duty. Do you think that's the right thing to do, or do you think people who are really feeling that, who are using transport in the UK, would benefit from that money being spent elsewhere? And secondly, does it conflict with your efforts to decarbonise transport? Would the money have been better spent, for example, in cutting VAT on EV charging?
So I do think it was the right thing to do to extend the 5p cut for another 3 months to the end of this year, given what has happened to petrol and diesel prices following the crisis in the Middle East. And, you know, I think when people are going to the petrol station to fill up, and the vast majority of cars that are on our roads at the moment, roughly 95%, are still using petrol and diesel.
You know, the poorest people in your constituency don't have a car.
Yeah, look, I do understand that your likelihood of owning a car increases with your income. You know, we have also made money available to bus operators to support them with the rising price of diesel. And so back at the end of May, the Chancellor announced a £100 million package which would support the free bus travel for children in the summer offer, but would also assist bus operators with the increased costs that they are experiencing given the cost of diesel. I do think it has been quite extreme circumstances this summer when you see how quickly the cost of petrol and diesel has gone up, and so I think the Chancellor was right to take that action. But we have also continued to invest in supporting the transition to EVs. We launched the electric car grant scheme last year. Over 120,000 drivers have now benefited from that in terms of support to purchase an EV. We're also doing a review of the costs of public charging to pick up on the other point that you made, which will report in autumn of this year.
Okay, I mean, I was going to expand, but maybe I shouldn't.
In answer to your general point, I don't think the two things need to be mutually exclusive from one another. We can support people when there are very significant cost of living pressures, which is what households have experienced this summer with prices at the petrol pumps. But we can also make sure that we are, from a policy perspective, taking sensible actions to support the transition to electric vehicles. March of this year saw I think it was a record sales month for electric vehicles, and in May of this year I think we were up to about 27% of new cars sold were EVs, and that was a 34% increase on the May previously. And so I think we are starting to see some positive impact of the government's policy agenda in enabling the transition to electric vehicles, but I also think it's right to support households with the cost of living pressures that they're currently experiencing.
We'll come back to this every Monday, I think.
And sorry, if I could ask you to make your answers a bit briefer, please, so we can get through things. Rebecca, you wanted to come in at this point.
Hello, Secretary of State. Just on specifically the cost of living impact on fuel costs, let's just assume that this happens again and we end up recognising that we're completely beholden on other countries for our petrol and diesel, which if we're not drilling in the North Sea is going to potentially continue. One of the things that we've looked at that I'm particularly keen on is alternative fuels as a solution to bringing down the tailpipe emissions. They're never going to be zero, but they're going to be better for that transition whilst we still have petrol and diesel cars on the roads. What does the challenge around fuel prices now, particularly based on fossil fuel prices, mean for that conversation around looking at alternative fuels? You know, you've got Formula One are doing the first season ever entirely on a synthetic fuel. What conversations are you beginning to have, given that we know that fossil fuels are potentially not something that we have control over in the future?
Joe might want to pick up on the issue of alternative fuels in particular. One of the observations I would make is that one of the ways in which we have reduced the carbon impact of road traffic has been through the RTFO, the Renewable Transport Fuels obligation, and that has increased the amount of biofuel that is in the petrol or the diesel that you buy when you go to the garage. And actually that's happened without a lot of people knowing, but it has had a really big impact on carbon emissions associated with driving. My own personal view is that the transition to electric vehicles, and we've obviously extended the date until hybrids are allowed to be sold until 2035, I think that probably offers us not only the greatest chance of decarbonisation still, but also there's huge potential economic activity and positive economic impact that could be associated with us being a world leader in this space. And so I'm keen to maintain our competitive advantage.
Are resources being spent on alternative fuels?
So as Secretary of State said, we have the renewable transport fuel obligation. I mean, with diesel, the question is not one of supply, it is the global market price.
Just to say, I'm talking specifically about cars rather than, HGVs and things like that, because clearly some progress has been made on that. I'm thinking more specifically about cars. But.
Yeah, no, I mean, for cars, it's as the Secretary of State said, the place where we really do see an opportunity for synthetic fuels, both for decarbonisation, but also for the UK, is sustainable aviation fuels. And we were really pleased yesterday to be able to announce the next stage of the Low Carbon Fuels Fund, and the further work on the revenue certainty following the legislation that was passed in the last session.
Okay, right, thank you. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. So we've obviously had a lot of chat over the last few months about the impact of the war in the Middle East, which supposedly will be coming to an end. We shall see. We can all hope so, of course. But are you confident that you have done enough as a department to ensure that passengers won't experience mass flight cancellations should the conflict resume, or significant price rises or surcharges this summer as a result of the war and its impact on oil flows and fuel, etc.?
Yeah, since the closure of the Straits of Hormuz and the start of this crisis, I've been having not quite daily but almost weekly conversations with the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, because he and his department have had a very close dialogue with jet fuel suppliers to understand how global trade flows are changing, given that, you know, prior to the crisis starting, 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas came through the Straits of Hormuz, but also to understand how much jet fuel is coming in. He also asked the 4 domestic refineries of jet fuel in the UK to maximise their production, and actually all of the contact I've had with the airlines, they have told me that at the moment they are not experiencing any shortage of jet fuel. Now, you know, it is good news what we've heard this week, but it is going to take some time for global supply chains to get back to normal. A lot of airlines hedge the purchase of their fuel, and so they've been protected over the summer, the major ones. Now that does differ by airlines. What we did decide to do was introduce some legislation to give airlines greater flexibility on landing slots, because in normal times they would have to use 80% of their landing slots in order to maintain their right to use them in the following year. And what I wanted to enable was responsible planning on the part of the airlines, because I didn't want last minute cancellations to be happening. So all the indications are that, you know, at the moment, based upon the information that we have, people shouldn't be experiencing major disruption due to jet fuel supplies in the coming months. And I was also pleased to see a number of airlines actually make public that they wouldn't be putting surcharges on. So airlines like Jet2, EasyJet, TUI and Ryanair have obviously given a price guarantee this summer.
I think that covers it for me, Chair.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Continuing with the theme of rising diesel fuel prices, has the department made a formal assessment of that impact on train, bus and coach operators?
Yeah, so as I said in answer to one of the previous questions, the Chancellor at the end of May did announce a package that was worth £100 million to support bus operators with their additional diesel costs, as well as providing money to enable the Kids Go Free offer in the summer. While some of the large operators also use hedging when they purchase their diesel, it's some of the small and medium-sized operators that we have been in contact with and we have been more concerned about. And that was part of the discussion that I had with the Chancellor, and I'm very grateful to her for making that money
buses,
available for
trains and
buses.
coaches?
Yeah, and so we are in discussion with Network Rail, and we've shared you know, some of our work and analysis on what might happen to supply and therefore cost in future. Network Rail, about 70% of passenger trains rely on electricity for traction and not diesel. And I know that Network Rail have basically forward purchased the vast majority of that. Now, you know, there will be some impact. We will look at that in the round when we're doing our business planning for next year. And so, look, yeah, on buses and trains, we have been in very close contact with operators, with Network Rail, and we will make sure that we do sensible business planning around it all.
And when you say that there may be some impact next year, what do you think that might look like? Is that likely to look like higher ticket prices, reduced service levels, the need for more subsidy? Have you given that thought yet?
I think it's all too early to say, and I don't want to get into the world of conjecture on this. When you do business planning, you will need to look at what revenue you're getting in. So the fact that we've still seen good growth in passenger numbers, that's a positive thing. The consideration about the £3 bus fare cap was a very live one for me when I was discussing with the Chancellor the need for support around diesel costs, because if we want operators to continue to participate in the scheme, They obviously don't have the flex, if they're still part of the £3 bus fare cap, to raise their ticket prices. And so what I didn't want, when people are experiencing cost of living pressures, going back to the point that was made earlier about actually it's the poorest in the country who rely most heavily on our bus network, it was really important that we provided some assistance with those costs so that there weren't operators pulling out at the £3 spare scheme, and we'll continue to keep all of that under review as we go through our business planning process. Jo, did you want to add anything?
Only to say we've brought together 40 people in the department, what we're calling the Middle East Task Force, to make sure we have all of the analysis, the relations out to the sector, to support the Secretary of State and Ministers in this planning.
And that covered buses and trains. What about coaches?
So, Jo, I don't know whether you've got detail on that or whether I might have to write to you on that, Alex, to be honest.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
probably best.
thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. And ZEV mandate. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. There have been a number of reports over the last few days about the Z mandate, including reports that an announcement is imminent. Is it?
So I think it might be helpful if I provide a little bit of context actually on all of this, because what happened last year, having done a consultation, we announced some changes in April to the ZEV mandate, which gave manufacturers greater flexibilities to comply. We also confirmed the 2030 phase-out date for the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, and we confirmed that hybrids could be sold until 2035. There is no suggestion that the 2030 or the 2035 dates will change. When we announced those flexibilities last April, which came into force at the beginning of this year, we also said that there would be another review that would be done in 2027. Now, we've started some early engagement with the car manufacturers as part of that review process. I do understand from car manufacturers that they are experiencing significant challenges at the moment, and so I would like to complete the review of the ZEV mandate that was due in 2027. I'd like to get that completed in the next 6 months. Now, what we are seeing is actually quite positive EV sales at the moment. I referenced earlier that in May there was 27% of cars that were sold were EVs, 34% increase on the May previous, and so we're also seeing a lot of investment in things like charging infrastructure, and this is a whole ecosystem that we need to get right if we're going to make this transition happen. The only other point I would make is that this is an area where we need the agreement of the devolved governments, and so before any consultation happens about any potential changes, I do need to have conversations with my colleagues in the other, my counterparts in the devolved governments, because what we don't want is a ZEV mandate that only applies to one nation of the UK. There are good reasons for it being part of devolved agreement, and so that's the process that we're going through at the moment.
Thank you very much. And you anticipated some of the questions on the process. You mentioned consultation with the devolved governments. Do you anticipate a public consultation as well on the range of the 2030 target?
So the 2030 phase-out date for the banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars remains, and there are no proposals to change that. There are no proposals to change the 2035 phase-out date for hybrid vehicles. The way in which the ZEV mandate operates is pretty straightforward when it comes to customers and consumers, but it's more complicated for the manufacturers. And so if I give you the example of this year, the headline target that manufacturers need to meet is 33% of sales need to be EVs. But they can essentially score credits towards meeting that headline target if they decarbonise their non-ZEV fleet fast. If they think that they are going to perform well in future years, they can borrow against that future performance, and some have actually brought over performance from previous years forward. And so there's a headline trajectory and an effective trajectory. And there are questions about exactly how that trajectory is defined. At the moment, the trajectory requires manufacturers to sell 80% of vehicles as EVs in 2030. And their point to us is, well, if we're selling, say, around 26% this year, how realistic is it for us to get to 80%? And, you know, would that be better to be slightly lower? And so it's essentially about the proportion of EVs and hybrids that are sold between now and 2035 in each year. So it's a complicated technical discussion, but it does require conversations with the devolved governments. I want to give respect to my partners and colleagues in the devolved governments to have those conversations in a meaningful way. We would then need to go out to public consultation, and then there would need to be agreement about the way in which we move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rebecca.
You mentioned this 27% in May, like that's a good thing. That's 63% are not EVs that were sold that month. You've also talked about this trajectory between now and 2030 and 35. We had the minister in a few weeks ago talking about the EV transition, and there are a huge number, sorry, I've got a cough sweet in my mouth, a huge number of gaps in that implementation. To me, those figures say that people aren't ready to do the transition at the speed in which you're hoping. So what conversations are you having with the ministers? Because when we challenged even the Office for Climate Change, they didn't have the answers to how we do the full transition across the entire country, not just the nice low-hanging fruit bits of London and Manchester and Birmingham that all have mayors and devolution, you know, the rural piece, all of that. How do we get that 27% across the country in time? Because at the moment that figure doesn't say to me that we're heading anywhere near that.
And also the people who don't have on street
parking.
their own
So when you look at
parking.
the figures in isolation, it's a great ambition, but if that is not in train with the infrastructure and the changes that need to happen, you know, it's 3 years away. To call me a cynic, but I think the figures are kind of
and we'll have our report
and one
on
of the reasons,
charging soon.
One of the reasons why we've committed to keeping the ZEV mandate under review is so that we can take account of how purchasing patterns are evolving. And I've set out the work that we will be doing in the next 6 months on that, and looking at that relative balance between the sales of pure EVs and hybrids. One of the other things that we have to do, and it's why I refer to the importance of the ecosystem when it comes to the transition, is that people have to have confidence that the charging infrastructure is going to be there. We've got 120,000 public charge points at the moment. We're funding an additional 100,000. We are also doing a review of the costs of public charging, because one of the things that people talk to me about is, you know, the third of people, myself included, I live in a terrace house, I don't have a driveway. We need to make the transition available for everyone, and if there's a differential between the costs of home charging versus public charging, you know, how does that play out in terms of people's propensity to make the switch? I do think we have seen quite a significant uptick in the purchase of EVs over the last couple of years, but we need to get the trajectories right so that we can move to a cleaner car fleet. But we also need to be pragmatic and have honest and realistic discussions with the car manufacturers about how we can make that transition by working in partnership with one another.
If I could just add very quickly, I think just to put it in context, these are obviously new car sales. Most people sort of don't buy new cars, so the second-hand market in EVs showing really strong progress, so 46% increase in second-hand EV sales last week, and I think Auto Trader reporting that 3 to 5 year old EVs are their fastest selling category at the moment. In terms of the charging infrastructure, we've got the local electricity vehicle infrastructure fund available to all local authorities. Rurality and deprivation are two of the factors we looked at in assessing the allocations precisely to make sure that charge points are available right the way across the country, as well as the work we're doing on the strategic road network.
Just very briefly, of that 46% that are second-hand, how many of those, do you have any reference on how many of those are new entries to the EV market and how many of those are just being sold to people who already had one? Because I think that's the key point, is how many people are entering the market for the first time, whether that is through brand new cars or second-hand cars, or how many of that is just the churn amongst the kind of converted who have the drives and the ability to do that parking. You don't have to answer that now, but I think that would be worth looking at.
Understood.
Anyway, and hopefully our forthcoming report on the charging infrastructure will be helpful. Right, let's move on. Ollie, EES checks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You'll both be aware that there's been lots of reports of delays and disruptions during recent school holidays as a result of the European Union's new entry-exit system, abbreviated as EES. How have you been working with European partners and airlines to mitigate the impact of EES checks on travellers? And it'd be good if you could cover a specific question about that. Do you feel we collectively with the EU have been doing enough to make the most of the EES suspension process, which, as I understand it, is available to EU member states until September?
Yeah, so I know that officials within the department have fortnightly meetings with airlines about this to make sure that we have the latest information about what their passengers are experiencing. Obviously, EES is an EU scheme and it's not a UK government initiative, so we don't have direct control over it. In March, I met with my EU counterpart, the EU Travel and Transport Commissioner in Brussels, to talk about this very issue. The EU countries do have the ability to pause the biometric checks when there is a lot of pressure at the border, and we know that some airports have done that because it was being phased in between October and April, and then it was going fully live in April. We did experience some problems in Dover in the May half term, and the French border authorities did apply some easements that enabled people to complete the border checks more quickly, and we will be working quite closely with our French counterparts, because obviously the summer getaway is the next thing that we'll all be thinking about in terms of Dover, because ideally we would avoid the scenes that we saw for a few hours on the bank holiday weekend in May. And so look, it's an issue that officials at a political level we are acutely aware of, and doing everything we can to make sure that people can travel easily and freely this summer.
Just a very quick supplementary on what you've said. Thank you for your answer. I mentioned that the EES suspension process is only available until September for EU member states. Do you feel that we should be making the case to the European Union that should be extended, given all of the issues, and is that something you'd be willing to consider?
Look, I do think we need to see how it goes over the next couple of months, and we need to be reassured that the planning for the summer period is rigorous, so that people, when they're travelling for their summer holidays, are able to start that holiday as soon as possible. I'd be happy to consider what more we could do with our European counterparts to provide reassurance and confidence in the system, because I do think it's important for people. I'd want to speak to my colleagues across government on this issue as well, colleagues in the Home Office. I'd be happy to come back to you with more information on it.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
I think two things. One would be to speed up the triggering of the easement within, very few hours, not 7 hours. And the other would be for passengers who've already been through the EES system once, shouldn't have to go through the whole rigmarole of fingerprints, etc. And I do think that needs doing. I am going to have to ask you to be really brief. Tell us new stuff. not stuff that we already assume to know. There's no need to repeat things you've already said in public or that we know anyway, because we've got a lot more to get through. Ollie again.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that admonishment applies to us on the committee asking you the questions as well, to be fair. So on to a topic that I know will fill you both with joy as it does us, HS2. When Mr. Wilde, the Chief Executive, recently came to talk to us, he told us that HS2 had been de-risked to become, and I quote, a very standard and straightforward railway to build. He also said that between 60 and 70% of the main civils works have been completed. So in that context, do you agree it is quite hard to understand why it's still going to take at least 10 more years, given most of the civils have been done, to lay track, install electrification and commission signalling, just for the section of Moldoak Common to Curzon Street?
I can understand why it's hard for people to get their head around, but the way that Mark Wilde has described this to me is that the civil engineering project is 4 years delayed. It's taken 4 years longer than it was originally predicted to do, and then the work on putting the systems in, testing, commissioning the railway. The original project team underestimated how long that was going to take by 3 years. And so those two things together add a further 7 years into this project. And as someone who oversaw the commissioning of Crossrail when I was the Deputy Mayor for Transport in London, I started in 2018. The civil engineering was pretty much completed. They were doing the final fit out of the stations, and the process of making sure that all of the systems, the communication systems, the signalling, everything was operating, getting the trains running, being tested on the track, making sure that everything works together. That took 4 years, between 2018 and 2022. And so what we've tried to do in delivering the reset on HS2 is have set credible delivery ranges for when that first phase between Old Oak Common and Birmingham Curzon Street is going to come online, and when the full line between Euston linking into Handsacre and services up to north of the West Midlands. But yeah, we got to do this properly, and I don't think anyone would forgive me for saying today that I think we could get it delivered in X year, only in 2 years' time to come back and say it's going to be 2 years later. So I press the team on how they can do things as fast as possible. That's also why we took the decision to reduce it from 360 to 320 kilometres per hour, because it was the professional opinion of Mark Wilde that could save us up to a year in delivery and up to £2 billion in terms of cost. And given the very, very marginal impact it would have on journey time, I thought that was the right thing to do for the programme.
Okay, let's turn to how things will work after HS2 in its truncated form. So, as I understand it, the current expectation for a rolling stock order reflects the previous assumption of HS2 Phase 2 going ahead. Now, does the department have a clear view of the train service and timetable that will be appropriate when HS2 is completed, given the cancellation of Phase 2 to the northwest of England?
So it was always going to be the case that HS2 trains would spend a lot of their time on the conventional rail network. And given the previous government's decision to cancel HS2 north of Birmingham, the making sure that the rolling stock that we deliver aligns with our ability to improve services north of the West Midlands is absolutely key. There are some live discussions going on at the moment between my department and the train supplier Hitachi Alstom. I'm not going to get into details of those at this stage, but no matter what's been said in the press about this, this is a top priority for my department to get right, that we are addressing ultimately capacity constraints between Birmingham and Manchester, and that we are ensuring that the decisions we take about rolling stock mean that we have an integrated rail service for people that ultimately end up on that bit of track between Birmingham and London, which is going to be the new HS2 infrastructure.
I understand your point about not wanting to get into specifics whilst it sounds like commercial discussions may be in place. Okay, right, you're happy for that phrase. But could you answer this hopefully fairly straightforward question about the goals for the post-HS2 operational reality? So for that reality for train service from London to Manchester, Liverpool, Preston and Glasgow, is it your expectation that whatever rolling stock and timetable solution has come up with, will that deliver the same number of seats for passengers as today, fewer or more?
We need to be increasing capacity on services between Scotland and North West and London. We know that the West Coast Main Line...
So it will be more. That's your expectation? The
we need
will
to address capacity constraints, yes. Okay. As a combination of whether it's timetabling and rolling stock.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving to Northern Powerhouse Rail, Elsie.
Just quickly, if I may, Chair, following on from my colleagues' comments there. You alluded to TfL being heavily involved in the delivery of Crossrail. TfGM obviously delivered the largest, or one of the largest, Metrolink systems in Europe. Do you agree that we've got a problem with delivering major infrastructure projects at a national level in this country?
I think historically we haven't covered ourselves in glory, and that's probably an understatement. And I think the lessons of the James Stewart review into HS2 should be well heeded. And I take from that a failure to plan properly in the early stages just results in bigger problems further down the line. I think you need to set your scope, you need to stick to it, and we also need to make sure that we've got the right quality leadership in place in these major infrastructure projects. Look, there are other big infrastructure projects that have been done really well. If you think about the Silvertown Tunnel in London, people barely talk about that because it was a huge success. If you can point to other big infrastructure schemes, the Transpennine route upgrade on time and on budget. And so, look, I think there have been failures, very public failures, and we can't repeat those mistakes. And we've done a lot of work to understand what those failures were and learn the lessons. But we also can do infrastructure well, and I think we should be proud of that.
Moving on to that point on leadership then, when it comes to Northern Powerhouse Rail, in April at the Public Accounts Committee, the Director of Northern Powerhouse Rail in your department stated, with regard to governance arrangements, we are on a trajectory to explore and come to a conclusion. The Northern Powerhouse, or NPR, has been a very active conversation since 2014. Why is the department still working out governance arrangements?
Well, the truth of the matter is I inherited an absolute mess, and the previous government didn't actually provide sufficient funding for work to be done. A small amount of funding was available. We've dedicated £1.1 billion in this spending review, but we also want to work differently because we need to work in partnership with local leaders, and we're doing that at 3 levels when it comes to Northern Powerhouse Rail. So at a city level, talking about things like the actual route alignment for the new Manchester to Liverpool Railway, with Mayor Steve Rotherham into Liverpool, talking about the nature of the new station at Manchester Piccadilly. The Mayor of Greater Manchester has big aspirations for an underground station as opposed to a surface station. We need to work through the detail of all of that. So we're working with local leaders at a city level, but we've also put in place the White Rose Rail Board, which was the suggestion of local leaders in Yorkshire, and you've got the Liverpool to Manchester Rail Board. We've put our minister on those rail boards, and that's going to be part of the governance process. And then we've also got some pan-northern arrangements to look at taking decisions on things like funding allocations within the £45 billion envelope. So I think the previous government didn't do the hard work with local leaders to get buy-in around scope, around prioritisation, around what happens first, what happens second, what happens third. And in order to set this programme up for success, we need to do that work now, and that's what my department is doing. Jo might want to say something internally about what we're doing around better control over the governance as well.
Yeah, so as the Secretary of State said, we're learning the lessons of the James Stewart Review, particularly his recommendation on HS2, that we now have a shareholder board which brings together all of the senior people in government who effectively have responsibility for stewarding the HS2 programme. For Northern Powerhouse Rail, that's therefore me. Beth Russell is the second Permanent Secretary at the Treasury, particularly supports the Chancellor on these issues, and Tom Reardon in his role as the Northern Growth Envoy, working to the Chancellor, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the Secretary of State for Transport, to make sure we have the governments and clarity of decision making, but also making sure we build on the success of how we worked with mayors and other local leaders to get to the announcement and the clear plan in January this year.
Thank you. So when might more details be available on the plans, timescales and costs of Northern Powerhouse Rail?
So we are wanting to provide more information on the indicative funding allocations for both Phase 1 and Phase 2 by the end of this year. And that may stretch into the end of the financial year. So Phase 1 obviously being the Yorkshire package of improvements, Phase 2 being the new line between Manchester and Liverpool. There is work that is already going on around Phase 1. Network Rail are doing some development work. That will generate a menu of costed options for the Yorkshire improvements. And we will then work to confirm the precise scope of those, working with the White Rose Rail Board that I referred to. We're also working on the options for Bradford Station and Manchester Piccadilly. We're expecting to make a decision on the location of the new Bradford Station later this year, and then Manchester Piccadilly to have advanced that work by the end of this financial year. And we've made a number of compact agreements with the mayors when we announced MPR in January. And so we're making progress on those as well, and that includes, for example, things such as the potential of reopening the Leamside line in the northeast.
Okay, thank you. Moving to Midlands Rail Hub, Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, you've been a strong supporter of the Midlands Rail Hub, and thanks to decisions taken after the election, the work to redesign and hopefully rebuild Kings Norton Railway Station in my constituency is proceeding, and hopefully works will start in this Parliament. Midlands Rail Hub's next stage is at Birmingham Snow Hill, where clearance work to reinstate the disused Platform 4 is now almost complete, which would relieve capacity constraints at Moore Street directly and indirectly at New Street. Are you able to give us an update on when the investment decision will be taken on reinstating Platform 4?
I might have to write to you about the detail of the investment decision, but just to say we are keen to realise the benefits of the work at Snow Hill as soon as possible, and you'll be aware that we're doing this work in a phased way to realise the western impacts before potentially looking to the eastern impacts at a future date. And so if we can get those services improved out from Moore Street down to the southwest and into South Wales, I think that would be really good strategic connectivity for the UK, whilst also enhancing the more local experience of commuters such as those in your constituency.
Thank you, and I very much hope the eastern part isn't lost, but we'll have to move on.
Rebecca.
And when you appeared before us in November, you said that your focus was going to move on to the design of Great British Railways as an organisation. So please, can you update us on your progress?
So I think we are making good progress with Great British Railways. We obviously had the Railways Bill pass its common stages last week, and that goes into the Lords. And you will be aware that that gives me the powers to set up GBR. We anticipate that GBR will be established probably about 12 months after the Act gets royal assent, but we're also making changes in advance of GBR coming into effect so that we've got more integrated management in the regions, and Lord Peter Hendy, when he was in front of the committee, might have explained to you the 3 integrated managing directors that we've got in place now in the southeast, in Anglia, and also in southwestern, which was the first one. We will be doing the same for the GTR area, the Greater Thameslink area, given that we took that train operating company into public ownership just a couple of weeks ago. I think that is starting to unlock some of the collaborative working that we want to see through GBR, and the fact that we're able to do that in advance of the organisation actually being set up is really positive. We will be making an announcement about the GBR headquarters in Derby soon, and we're also working on the appointment of the chair of GBR, and would anticipate making an announcement about who the chair of this organisation will be, because it's important that they're in post in order to recruit the executive leadership of the organisation, so we're ready to go when we get to the establishment of GBR towards the end of 2027.
And what's been the role of the Shadow Great British Railways team? Because that feels like it's gone very quiet. Didn't get a huge amount of mention during Bill Committee, hasn't been mentioned here much. Obviously she came before us 12 months ago, but since then I haven't really heard much.
Laura Schoaf, who was appointed as the Shadow GBR chair, did a really important piece of work for us. And we've closed down Shadow GBR now, but Laura has joined the board of the DFT operator, which is the publicly owned holding company that all of the TOCs get transferred into when they come into public ownership. I think it was important that she did a piece of work to bring the leaders of the rail industry together to start to understand shared priorities, to start to develop that really customer-focused culture as well. We have done that. You know, we've got the industry now focused on 2 primary performance measures about trains turning up within 3 minutes of the time that they should turn up by, and also looking at the number of last-minute cancellations. So she brought people together in that convening role, but now I think, you know, her expertise on the board of DFTO is something that we're really pleased to still have, but as a separate entity we didn't feel that as we're getting closer to the establishment of Great British Railways we needed Shadow GBR to be there, because we've got to get DFTO and Network Rail working much closer together.
And just pursuing the kind of organisational structure a bit further, you know, it's really clear that this is going to become, you know, one of the biggest public sector employers in the country. Even your description that you've just given shows it's a very piecemeal, you know, you've got a chair, you've got DFTO, you've got each of these chief executives. I suppose I'm looking for reassurance that it's going to be accountable, but also as you develop those things in quite a piecemeal process, you've got individual chief executives coming in. How are you looking across the entire organisation without a Shadow GBR to bring in things like terms and conditions that are consistent and that aren't going to cost the taxpayer the earth when all of these different businesses come in and have to be equalised? Like, are they going to be equalised? Are they not? It's incredibly complicated, and my experience of the NHS is that it doesn't work great. So I'm just interested to know what your views are on that.
So what we have sought to do in the last couple of months is rationalise the number of different organisations that are involved. So, for example, we've transferred about 200 or 300 staff from the DFT into DFTO. So you're reducing the number of individual organisations that will all feed in to Great British Railways, and to start to develop the right cultures in the 2 primary organisations that will come together, Network Rail and DFTO. At the moment, the train operating companies that transfer in, they remain individual employers. And if you think of an organisation like Transport for London, you have
Sorry,
different employers
I'm really
there.
concerned about the amount we've got to get
Yeah.
through. So could you try and make your answers much briefer, and we don't need all of the detail, just your top level points on every one. I do apologise, but we do want to get through all the topics. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't answered my question, but I'm getting a bit of a sense. So I think next time you come, perhaps we'll put this higher up the list. And
Okay, sorry, Rebecca, but Heathrow expansion, Scott.
So we're getting much...
Sorry, I've gone out of order. East-West Rail, still on rail. East-West Rail, very quickly.
Yes, noting the chair's admonishments. We've explored a few times, Secretary of State, about the lack of train services between Oxford and Milton Keynes. Yeah. Is there anything specific you could tell the committee about progress that is being made, or when anything might happen?
So look, I am frustrated by this as well.
I'm sure.
The planning application that was made and given consent in December for Universal Studios, I think, does actually make the railway, the second phase of the railway, into quite a different beast. And so we've had to finish the work at the stations, places like Winslow, that needs to be handed over. Chiltern Railway, as I said to you, oral questions last week, are leading negotiations with the unions as well, so that we get the staffing right. But for me, look, I really want to get that first phase between Oxford going to Bletchley and Milton Keynes open as soon as possible.
Okay, but no timescales available as of yet?
I don't have an entry into service date, no.
Very, very quick question on that. Has the department made an estimate as to the lost ticket revenue and other costs associated with that lack of train service?
We haven't as yet, but what I have also asked the department to do is to make sure that, given that train services aren't running at the moment, is there a way in which we can bear down on costs? Because if we're not getting the revenue in, the worst thing would be to have all of the costs going out. So we have, for example, released a train to support services. I think it was on West Midlands trains as well. And at the point at which we get an entry into service date, we can make a calculation about that, but our focus needs to be getting the trains into service.
Okay. One very quick question on this, Chair. I promise I shall recover on the next one. I promise. Just a quick question about the further phase of East West Rail. Yeah. Now, if I remember correctly, one of the learnings you said from HS2 is that proven technology is the best way forward, rather than trying to invent something new. So does that apply to East West Rail, given that East West Rail is currently proposing discontinuous electrification, which would involve battery trains running at 100 miles an hour, 5 trains an hour, which answers they've given me suggest do not exist anywhere else in the world at the moment. Is that proven technology, and is that wise?
So the conversations that I've had with David Hughes, who's the Managing Director of East West Rail, do give me confidence that they are looking at the right technological solutions. We have done discontinuous electrification on other parts of the rail network.
100 miles an hour.
Look, those discussions will continue to take place between EWR and my department. I think it probably is the best value for money way of delivering the scheme, but we will make sure that we're robustly testing any assumptions about novel aspects of the way in which that technology may be deployed.
Okay, I shall move on to avoid testing the chair's patience. Over the last few months, in terms of rail services that currently exist, we've seen cuts to summer timetables on Avanti and Thameslink on the Luton to Rainham service group. We've seen restrictions introduced on the ability to gain refunds before the day, which undermines the attractiveness of flexible tickets. And we've also seen, apparently, a disagreement between GWR and Transport for Wales about new services on the basis of where the revenue would go. Are all of these things a taste of what life under GBR is going to be like, or perhaps will things be better?
So I think the last example that you gave there about the disagreements between Transport for Wales and GWR about access to track and running of new services, that will be better under GBR, because at the moment it's a decision that the ORR have to take. We're changing the way that access decisions are going to be made through the Railways Bill, and there'll be a single guiding mind there. I've also signed a memorandum of understanding with the Welsh Government, the former Cabinet Secretary for Transport, about how we're going to work together on these sorts of issues to make sure that we're maximising, connectivity, appropriate capacity for people that are making those sorts of England to Wales journeys. I think the other two examples that you mentioned, what I'm not going to pretend is that under Great British Railways we're not going to be trying to find ways to deliver services more efficiently, and I think it is appropriate that a train operator, whether it's a privately run train operator or a publicly run one, make sure that it's using its public subsidy to best effect. We probably do need to reduce public subsidy. Therefore, we do need to match the capacity to demand on services. And I think sensible operational decisions have to be made on those sort of things. And I'm also not going to apologise for taking action to tackle fraud in terms of people claiming a refund for a ticket that they've used, and those changes to on-the-day refunds. We communicated clearly with people in advance of those changes coming in. I think that was the other example you gave. I think that's a reasonable thing for us to be doing, because you can't tolerate a situation where people are making a refund for a ticket that they've actually used.
Oh, I think we could all agree we wouldn't want that, but perhaps a better way of doing that would actually have people on trains checking tickets. I mean, perhaps you and I could compare stats as to how often that happens between London and Didcot and Swindon, but not now.
Okay, right, thank you. Rebecca, did you have one here or not? No, don't worry.
Given your time constraints, I'm happy to
Alex, you had a quick question.
Thank you. The Rail Minister wrote to the committee recently laying out the proposed starting point for local and regional structures, and you were alluding to it just before. Inevitably, this will mean that for some passengers, they travel between different business units while on a single train. Is there any danger that it actually becomes harder for the passenger to identify who they should be speaking to? Because at the moment you look at the branding on your train and think, I'm on a Thameslink one. In the future, everything will look GBR, and how would you know which local business unit leader to talk to?
So we are going to maintain regional branding within GBR. So it will be GBR Great Western, GBR, it may be Midlands, it may be GBR Anglia as opposed to GBR. We're not going to have GBR C2C and Greater Anglia. So we will make pragmatic decisions so that it is clear to customers. The one bit of the jigsaw that we still need to work through is cross-country trains, because by their very nature, they cross a number of different infrastructure regions at the moment. And so that's an ongoing piece of work, and I'm happy to come back to the committee to update you on that. But we will maintain regional branding because I do think it's helpful from a navigation point of view for customers.
Okay, thank you. Where am I? Right, now I'm going to Heathrow expansion. Scott.
Cross-country trains go to Edinburgh, so just call it GBR Edinburgh. That'd be fantastic. So Joe's nodding as well, so that's that done. Okay. So people think about Heathrow. Obviously, we've got the statement coming later this year. The costs are huge, but it's largely, it is a private sector development. Do you see any public money getting spent on road or rail or public transport connections to it?
So I think our position on this has been pretty clear and pretty consistent. Airport expansions are privately funded, privately financed, and any associated improvements to the road network or the rail network needs to be met by the scheme promoter rather than the taxpayer. There's no money dedicated in this spending review to making improvements to Heathrow in terms of rail or roads, short of actually we're funding some additional Elizabeth Line trains which benefit the wider London region and may benefit connectivity to Heathrow as well. And so our position hasn't changed on that.
Good.
Your DCO decision on the second runway at Gatwick said that the scheme, therefore the operators presumably, must fund a specific standard of noise mitigation to those newly affected residents under the new runway, plus surface access rail improvements on that line. If the same logic applies to the Heathrow third runway, are those additional costs incorporated into the current figure of, I think, something like 35 billion for the third runway? Have they been fully calculated and incorporated into that eventually the passengers and freight operators are going to have to pay for the landing charges for?
So it will be for a promoter of a scheme, the applicant at the DCO, to set out what their proposals are to meet the obligations that we will define in the Heathrow Expansion National Policy Statement. And it will be for them to make the calculation about how much those mitigations will cost. And so as the Secretary of State for Transport, I can't answer you that question because I'm not the applicant and I'm not the
those elements will be in the ANPS and they'll be set out, those elements will be set out in the ANPS.
There will be clear tests that need to be met in what we will call the Heathrow Expansion National Policy Statement, because it's specific to Heathrow, not the airport's national policy statement now. And all on noise, on climate, on economic growth, and on air quality. There will be very clear tests and very clear expectations set out about what any applicant would have to meet in order for their application for a third runway and expansion at Heathrow to be deemed consistent with the policy framework of the government.
Okay, thank you. On Lower Thames Crossing, it's assumed it's going to be a private sector project, and the assumption is that it's going to be a tolled road, and using that logic. So yes, it is going to be a tolled road and run by the private sector. Beyond that crossing, what other road schemes do you envisage being brought forward under the regulated asset base model enabled by the Highways Financing Bill? Will they be brand new roads? Will they be capacity enhancements? Or will they just be where improvements and updating and climate mitigation needs to be done? And if it's the latter, on sort of essential work on existing roads, how will they be financed? Unless we're going to introduce new tolls to existing roads.
So we're not being specific at this stage, but what it would be new large-scale road infrastructure. So it might be, for example, new river crossings, but we're not being prescriptive or specific.
You are looking at new road capacity building, despite our exchange at the beginning.
We haven't.
Of the session.
No, what I'm saying is that it would be possible to use the mechanisms that will be set up via the Highways Financing Bill that we will bring forward in this session. In theory, it would be possible to use that mechanism to fund new road infrastructure, such as a river crossing. What I'm sat here today, I can't point you to a scheme on a map where beyond the Lower Thames Crossing I've identified that this would be appropriate for, and it doesn't change our policy on tolling in any way.
The policy on tolling being only for new roads?
So historically, we've agreed to tolls on things like new river crossings, and that's been the case with the Silvertown Tunnel, for example. What we need to do through the Highways Financing Bill is set up a system whereby we can have an economic regulator, which will be the ORR in this case, and set up the regulated asset-based model and enable, for example, a private entity to take on Highways Authority functions as well. So that's the piece of work that needs to happen in advance of a transaction happening to dispose of the existing Dartford crossing, as well as the rights to build and own, maintain, operate the Lower Thames crossing in future. And there will be the process by which the tolls will be set, both in the first settlement period and then subsequently. That will all that will be set out as we go through the process of taking that bill.
What you're saying is the bill will only actually be needed in a very few examples because it's not going to be used for repairs and maintenance.
Exactly. It sets up a regulation. But if you think, for instance, about the 7 crossings, I think I'm right in saying both those crossings had bespoke legislation, I think probably both hybrid. The Highways Financing Bill, which I hope you'll see shortly, would provide the structure such that you could use it without needing to take bespoke hybrid legislation for future developments of that scale and nature.
Thank you. Sorry, Ollie, I'll go back to you and then I'm done with those 2 questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully a reasonably concise question and maybe answer. So the Road Investment Strategy 3 outlines that 1.66 billion pounds has been allocated to the Lower Thames crossing, which is around 174 million pounds more than previously announced at the spending review in the autumn budget. So my question is, why was that increase not disclosed as a spending pressure in the department's main estimate? And are there any other things that are in a similar category that have not been disclosed as additional spending pressure?
Yes. Yeah. So if I set out, we've made a number of announcements about how we are funding Lower Thames crossing since the election. So first of all, the spending review. The government announced the 590 million for the first year of the spending review period. We were still working with the Secretary of State and the Treasury on the overall approach to the financing of Lower Thames crossing at that stage. So we only announced the first year, made the commitment that at autumn budget 2025 we would announce the overall approach, and so the Treasury committed a further £891 million at that point. We have in the department, as we would with any infrastructure programme, looked at what is needed for the programme to get the most efficient and effective delivery, and then whether we are able to allocate funding. So the difference you see is choices we've been able to make within the department to bring forward to this financial year an extra 174 million, effectively to de-risk the programme by making faster progress on those early construction works. It's all included within the main estimate disclosure on national highways of 4.2 billion. So it's effectively, with any infrastructure programme, it is difficult to predict at the start of a spending review period exactly what will be efficient to spend in any period of time. We look both on a portfolio basis, if you think about RNEP in rail, or where we have standalone projects like this, where we can bring forward spend where we can to have the most efficient and effective delivery, and that's what the Lower Thames crossing spending represents. Okay,
so if I could just make sure I've understood. So it has been disclosed, but in effect it's been moved from one bucket to the project specifically?
Yeah, so in looking at our overall capital allocation at the spending review, we've then specifically allocated that additional funding that we were able to make available from within the department's own capital programme to Lower Thames Crossing, because that felt to us the most efficient use of that capital funding in this financial year.
Thank you. Right, devolution. Lawrence.
Thank you. You've recently announced a mass transit task force. The Leeds tram scheme has been subject to extended delays to the late 2030s now. We've been talking about a South Birmingham tram extension since 1984. Why do you think that light rail schemes cost so much and take so long to deliver in this country?
It's a really good question, and it's a question that's exactly why we've set up the Mass Transit Task Force, being chaired by Bridget Rosewell. I think that that we've been told that there are a lot of barriers that promoting authorities experience. Sometimes they're to do with planning, sometimes it's regulatory. I also think that we need to make sure that whichever the authority is that is promoting the scheme and overseeing it has the relevant capability, capacity and expertise to be able to client these projects well and to take sensible decisions about how to prioritise delivery of the scheme, modal choices as well. So you've got bus rapid transit schemes can provide really good outcomes, as well as tram schemes with fixed infrastructure. And so look, I'm pleased that we're doing this work with the task force because I think it's urgently needed. But I'm also clear that we need to be working closely, especially with our mayors now, whether that's Tracy Brabin in the West Midlands, West Yorkshire, Richard Parker in the West Midlands, to make sure that we can accelerate delivery so that people that haven't had the benefit of a mass transit system can actually start to see that option available to them in their local areas.
And just very specifically on Transport and Works Act orders, the department said at the end of May that it would be consulting on devolving that process to mayoral authorities. How quickly do you anticipate that happening?
So this is, we do need to do a consultation on it, and this came up because through the mayor's right to request arrangements, they said that they wanted to see devolution of consenting powers for Transport and Works Act orders. It is quite a complex legal area because TWAOs are actually pieces of secondary legislation. And so my officials are currently looking at how the process could work for mayors who don't typically have the ability to lay secondary legislation in Parliament. But we do want to make rapid progress on this, and I think it's another area in which we can demonstrate our willingness to listen to the case that mayors are making to us and to try and find ways of speeding this process up.
Thank you.
Thank you. On devolution, your view, the government's view, is to devolve decisions on both pavement parking and speed limits to local authority areas. But most drivers don't live in the world of local government boundaries and won't know what the default regulation for pavement parking or default speed limit is in any one particular area. So how is this going to happen without a plethora of street furniture and signage?
Well, I think you've always got to have appropriate signage so that users of the road and individuals who are parking know what regulations they're complying with. And to be honest, we
have the default 30 in urban areas with street lights, 60 where there's no street lights and no other signage. In London, as you know, we have the default pavement parking ban. So, without loads and loads of extra signage, because that's a national default.
Look, you need signage to make it clear to the travelling public. The other thing I would point to is the work that I'm keen that we explore, highlighted in the Better Connected strategy, is to find a way in which we can make available data across the country so that private companies in future could, for example, provide an integrated app where you could have a one-stop shop where, ideally, as a user of the roads myself and car parks, ideally I'd be happy to, put my credit card details or my debit card details on an app, and then it could immediately recognise when you're in different car parks, when you're in different clean air zones, when you're in different going under a tunnel where a toll applies, that you could have easy information available to you about what restrictions are in place on that
I mean,
part
the
of the road
tech
network. So,
is there on mapping technology, but
Yeah.
and that's a fair point. If we all use mapping technology and it was accurate, it would be fine. But I don't know about you, but I noticed that the mapping technology tells me I'm in a 30 mile an hour, but the signage says I'm in a 20. It's not keeping up, but
Yeah.
I'll move on.
I take your point.
So if it works, tech would be the answer to my question. Right, Elsie.
Thanks, Chair. So broadening it back out again, how would you characterise your department's philosophy on devolution?
So I would say that there are really three aspects to this when it comes to how we approach devolution. I have always believed that decisions should be taken at a level where the best knowledge resides about the impacts of those decisions and where the ability to implement decisions sits, because I'm just conscious sat at my desk in Whitehall when I'm being asked about the appropriateness of, for example, tolls and the level of tolls on particular bits of the road network in particular parts of the country. With the best will in the world, I might get information presented to me by my officials, but those sorts of decisions do feel like that they should be more appropriately taken at a local level. So I think there should be a clear national strategic framework, but the decisions should be taken at a level where the knowledge is best. I think also that local authorities and mayoral combined authorities should be given the space to deliver against their ambitions, and that there should be greater flexibility for those with stronger capability and capacity. And I think also, though, that my department, given that we oversee a capital budget and a spending review that's over £90 billion, we also need to remain accountable to Parliament for how that money is spent. But what I don't want to be doing is spending every day of every week marking the homework of local authorities and mayoral combined authorities on schemes that they're delivering. So we have done some work to reset the thresholds of major schemes and what information those devolved parts of government, what information they need to be providing to us, so that we can then say back to Parliament and I can talk to the Chancellor and say this is money well spent.
And what about fiscal devolution then to combined authorities? Should they be able to raise more revenue locally?
So this is something that the Treasury are looking at the moment.
Are you having conversations with the Treasury on transport schemes in particular?
Some, and so what we have been able to do is make some progress, for example, with extending the DLR to Thamesmead. That was working very closely with the Treasury, and I'm sure the Mayor of London will want to be saying more on that in due course. But yeah, I work very closely with the Treasury on this.
And do you think there are any sort of major blockers on further transport devolution?
So I'm always willing to have the conversation, and the right to request framework that this government has set up I think is working quite well. So I have been approached, for example, by the Mayor of Liverpool City Region about him having more control over local stations, some local stations where he believes not to define and specify the nature of the rail service, but to actually make better use of the physical building and the commercial assets on those stations. And I'm really willing to make sure that all of the relevant conversations can happen between him as the Mayor of Liverpool City Region, Network Rail, in future GBR. And so, look, I think we've got to, I'm always willing to talk, but I need to be sure that we are managing public money well, and the only limit to it is where there is, really significant infrastructure projects. I think it's right that we retain control of things like East West Rail, the Trans-Pennine Route upgrade. Clearly GBR is a national organisation and will be a national organisation, and so look, those sorts of things, the strategic road network, it's important that that is managed nationally, but I am willing to have more conversations about what could be devolved in future.
And just finally on devolution, this committee has just published its report on the PHV sector and made several recommendations, including on the matter of out-of-area working, where many local licensing authorities are really clear that they want to decide for themselves who should be able to operate in a given area. And from your response to the Chair in the Commons last week, it seems that the view of your department is that drivers and operators should be licensed where they intend to provide services. Would you agree that if we're able to sort of continue to deliver on the potential impact of transport devolution and strengthen local autonomy, this is something that we need to address swiftly?
Are you specifically asking about out-of-area working?
Yes.
Yeah. What we've said is that we will consider this as part of the work that we're doing on pre-legislative scrutiny for a future taxi and private hire bill. One of the things that a couple of changes have already been made through legislation that we've passed in the last year around setting national standards and also enabling enforcement action to be taken against an operator or a vehicle or a driver, irrespective of where the licensing had taken place. One of the things that I'm concerned to avoid, if I'm being totally honest, in the discussion about cross-border hiring is anything that would make the availability of private hire vehicles less for people who are wanting to make trips. I also think we need to think about the number of empty cars and empty journeys without passengers on that isn't good for the operator if they haven't got a fare payer, and also isn't good for the environment if a car is moving around without people in. And if that also means that someone is waiting longer for a private hire vehicle to turn up, I think we've got to put the consumer at the heart of this. Now, I don't have a closed mind, but what I would want to be assured of is that all of those sorts of considerations have been, properly factored into any decisions that we make in future. That's why we're doing a proper piece of work before we introduce taxi and private hire legislation. And I'd really welcome the input of the committee in terms of scrutinising draft legislation so that we can continue this conversation and actually make sure that, when we in future, if we are lucky enough to get a legislative slot, that we've got a piece of legislation that's fit for purpose.
Well, you have our report. Okay, thank you. Ollie? No.
Excuse me?
No, sorry. Scott? Yep, okay, Scott.
Thank you. I mean, your explanation of devolution is good, actually. We want to empower people locally, etc. That's great. But sometimes it feels like it's because we don't want to make the difficult decision in the centre of government. So pavement parking or speed limits, these set to benefit the most vulnerable people, but yet sometimes they can be controversial. So it feels like sometimes we're just not making those difficult decisions and actually encouraging local authorities just to deliver. And the latest one's the cycling and walking strategy, isn't it? Fantastic strategy, money in it, etc. But there's no targets. There's just an expectation that local authorities might, if they want to set their own targets, and these may or may not be demanding. Is that just another example of where we're just avoiding difficult decisions?
Well, we have set targets in the cycling and walking investment strategy because we've said that we want 55% of short trips that are done in towns and cities by 2035 to be done by people that are walking or cycling, and we've set a really ambitious target actually around enabling more children to walk, cycle and scoot to school, and that's a 60% target by 2035. And
how does that shape itself in local authorities then? Are they mandated to do that? Is that legally obliged to do so?
No, there's not a mandation and there's not a legal obligation. We're setting out the direction of travel from government. Look, I think back to the previous government's second cycling and walking investment strategy. They may have had more granular targets in them, but we still failed to get anywhere near them and failed to make progress. Partly, as I think I might have said earlier in the session, because they took £200 million out of their active travel budget, and even though they put those targets in place, they had no credible plan to actually meet them. And so that's why, I think it's more important that Active Travel England have set out a delivery plan alongside the cycling and walking investment strategy, and that they say, actually, we're going to deliver X thousand more safer crossings in the next 4 years. We're going to provide X amount mileage more of safe cycling infrastructure, and we're going to link up set the foundations in place for a national active travel network. So I would rather that I am having a discussion with Active Travel England, who are going to provide support to local authorities to deliver on the ground, rather than me having an argument around what percentage applies in X particular area, where I can't possibly, as the Secretary of State, understand the everyday realities of life in that particular area. I would rather, me and my ministers, spend my time on thinking about how we deliver so that we get actual change on the ground, as opposed to arguing about targets, which, if you take the example of the previous government, were never met anyway because there wasn't a plan to deliver.
Yeah, nobody wants you to micromanage, but somebody could end up in a local authority which isn't interested in banning pavement parking, isn't interested in making pedestrians safer by reducing speed limits, and isn't interested in investing in walking and cycling. But you wouldn't intervene in that circumstance. Instead, you would wait for somehow a future election to change that local authority. Do people really? Is that really the best way to make our communities safer?
I think the democratic process in our country can actually yield change that people want to see. And if there is an outcry for 20 mile per hour zones in residential areas, I've seen local authorities across the country choose to respond to that, because it is the sort of bread and butter issue that gets raised when all of us go knocking on doors, when if you've got an appalling tragedy that happens on a road, someone's killed, very seriously injured. I've actually seen local authorities respond to that type of request for change. And so, look, I think the time and effort of government is best spent in setting the overall strategic direction, not arguing about individual granular targets. Instead, spend time focused on what money are we going to spend on what to deliver change in the next 3 or 4 years.
And if I may quickly, this takes us back to where we started with the strategic plan. So the main estimates memorandum has our key performance metrics. One of those 14 is the average number of people walking and cycling stages per person per year, because for us to be held to account on whether all of the action we are taking, we're enabling others to take, delivers the real outcome as measured through that National Travel Survey.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay.
I've got to handle that.
You're on a roll. On accessibility, you didn't accept our call for a specific transport accessibility strategy because we're bringing in the integrated transport strategy, but you did agree that we needed clearly mapped actions, milestones and accountability measures at all levels. However, the actual strategy that you have published, the Better Connected strategy, sets out only 3 concrete actions for delivering accessibility, 2 of which had already been announced. Do you think your integrated, your Better Connected strategy has delivered the accessibility aspirations that you promised?
I think the 3 big commitments in Better Connected are very significant and really important. And I think if you speak to people who are disabled and use the public transport network and some of their representatives, the fact that we've got the Law Commission doing this review now, a big piece of work to make recommendations about what the future direction should be for regulations and enforcement. I think that's a really significant piece of work. We're doing the work on the Accessibility Charter, which will hopefully enable us to move both quickly and to raise expectations of operators to actually go beyond what is set out in the current regulations. And also we do need to address these data gaps so that we can take better targeted enforcement action in future. But I also think if you look at what we're doing, through the Bus Services Act, in terms of mandating disability awareness and assistance training, if you look about the accessibility duty that we're putting in the Railways Bill, and if you think about what things like Lillian Greenwood has said when she came before your committee, I think back in January, talked about how we want to use the process of setting national standards on taxi and private hire to make sure that we're addressing issues for the disabled community there. I think there's a lot that's going on already, and I think we are ambitious in what we're trying to do.
There is a lot going on. Often you've just listed different modes that it's going on in. If you're doing it in the context of an integrated transport rubric, wouldn't that be facilitating end-to-end journeys, which is what people with disabilities really need?
Yeah, and I do think that accessibility is at the heart of our integrated transport strategy. And what I don't want is this to become sort of siloed and someone else's problem. I want every operator of every transport mode, whether it's the local bus service in Wantage through to the operator of one of Europe's largest hub airports, everyone needs to understand that accessibility for the travelling public is not a nice to have, it's absolutely essential. I do think whether it's through the Civil Aviation Bill, where we're taking forward reforms to benefit passengers there, the work we're doing on buses, on rail, rolling out welcome points, getting better training on trains, all of this starts to join together to give a better experience across the entire journeys that people are making.
Okay. Previous government's inclusive transport strategy had the ambition to create a transport system offering equal access for disabled people by 2030. Is that your ambition?
So my ambition, again, I come back to the point I was making earlier. We can all put warm words down on a piece of paper, but you actually need to deliver real change that people are going to feel the impact of. And, I'm struck by what members of our advisory committee in the Department for Transport have said to me, which is that, if every journey could be as good as my best journey, then we wouldn't have a problem. So for me, a more consistent experience for disabled users of our transport network, so that they can be assured that they are going to be able to routinely make the journeys that they need to be able to make is I think, one of the most important things.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Something we've looked at in this committee is HGV driver welfare, and in particular the lack of welfare facilities across much of the strategic road network and the local road network. With there being no plans to reopen the parking and driver welfare matched funding scheme, what concrete actions are you taking to improve rest facilities and parking capacity?
Yeah, so the match funding grant scheme has obviously been delivering over the last couple of years, and I went to a truck stop on the outskirts of my own constituency a couple of months ago where the parking facilities, the rest facilities for lorry drivers are so markedly better than they were previously, and I think that was a £35 million scheme, so there will be an uplift. We're also working through the National Planning Policy Framework on a new set of policies to make sure that from a planning perspective we are considering freight and logistics developments and its associated infrastructure better than we have been previously, making sure that there's access to transport networks and lorry parking provision, and we are due to issue a response on that later this summer. So that's sort of on that planning policy side of things, we're doing quite a lot of work.
Might that include obligations on developers of large logistics projects to make facilities available on a shared basis? Because something we've heard is that when it's dependent on Section 106 commitments for HGV drivers from across the country are not going to be at the top of local authorities' priority lists.
Yeah, the detail of that I would need to check with officials and come back to you on, but I am aware of the type of challenges that you outline, and I think it's a fair question to ask.
I think it's important that National Highways is a statutory consultee on planning applications for lorry parking, so they are able to take into account the sort of strategic impact of that sort of provision.
Okay, sorry. Just on driver facilities, will there be a service area on the Lower Thames crossing?
Joe, do you know the answer?
Could you come back to us?
I can come back to you on that.
Thank you. Driving test ability and how long people have to wait to get a driving test?
Yes, obviously very pleased that you agreed with some of us that were campaigning to clamp down on the reselling and swapping of driving test slots, and you admitted at the start of the session that driving test wait times are still too long. So how is that feeling for people that are still waiting for a driving test slot?
Look, I totally understand people's frustrations about this, and I've been absolutely clear with the leadership of DVSA that this is their number one priority in terms of the next year. We have done a lot, but demand is still very high. So we've got a net increase of 147 driving examiners.
Secretary of State, we've asked all of these questions, we've got similar answers about what you are doing. Do you have an aspiration as to how long drivers will have to wait for their test coming down, by what amount and by when? Because that's what's important, because we know about the churn of examiners, we know the difficulties. You know, could you answer us about the outcome rather than the specific?
Realistically,
job?
this is going to take a long time to sort this problem out, and I think by the autumn of next year we should be back down to the 7-week aspiration that we've got.
What would be the waiting time be in the autumn of next year?
So actually what we're also going to be doing is, because the statistics that we have produced and published have not been particularly helpful in terms of average wait times, and so we are changing the statistics that we're going to be publishing routinely, broken down by driving test centre as well. Look, you know, my aspiration is to get us back down to a point where when someone is booking a test, they're not having to wait months on end to get one, which is the situation for some people in some locations at the moment. But I do just want to reassure the committee chair that we are taking this really seriously. We have recruited more driving examiners. We did bring in military examiners as well. We've reduced the amount of training that driving examiners need so we can get people through the training more quickly. We've taken action to reform the booking process so that only learner drivers can book their driving tests now. We're taking action on those bots and swaps as well, so that we've got greater clarity on exactly where in the country we need to be recruiting the additional driving examiner resource to, because there was so much churn in the system previously. The action that we've taken in the last couple of months, I mean, it's too early to draw completely definitive conclusions on it, but we have seen evidence that swap volumes have gone down by 70%. And refund volumes also fell by around a third since the 12th of May, which I think indicates that this sort of speculative booking and then rebooking, perhaps there's less of that happening. And so there's a huge amount of work to go on, and as I say, it's the number one priority I've given to.
And if I may quickly, I think we're really delighted with the impact of the new chief executive Beverly Warmington, who's bringing all of her operational delivery experience to really understand the whole complex system, and therefore mean that driving examiners in DVSA can spend most of their time delivering these.
And just on driving
services.
examiners, how many new driving examiners have come in since September 2025?
Net.
So I think there's over 240 people that have successfully completed their training, but the key figure to be focused on is the net additional driving examiners, because if you're losing people and you're not retaining people, so the net additional figure is another 147 driving examiners employed in May of this year compared to May of last year.
Okay, that's good. I mean, we've been on this for 18 months and we're not seeing the outcome changing, but I do need to move on. Buses, Alex.
Thank you. In your response to our Buses Connecting Communities report, you said that the government's objective is to grow bus usage, and you expect this to be the key driver for local authorities. But in a report commissioned recently by the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it was clear that the new Mayor's priorities was actually financial. And there's a suggestion in that report that mileage could be cut by 19% by 2035. If a local leader decides to go down the route of cutting buses, is this something that the government's comfortable with?
That's certainly not the aspiration that I would want for the people of Cambridge and Peterborough, but it's within, you know, the way in which individual locally elected leaders decide to use the funding that we've allocated to them and the level of aspiration that they have for their bus network is their decision, given that bus networks operate predominantly locally. You know, what I would also say is, you know, that people will decide when they get to the ballot box on the next occasion whether they are happy with the way in which the Mayor of a combined authority has improved the public transport network in their area or not. So whilst it's not an aspiration that I would recommend mayors having, you know, it is for individual mayors to decide their approach.
So theoretically, all the mayors of the country could be deciding to cut buses, and the government has no policy that... Well, does the government have a policy to try and increase bus usage if that happens?
Well, you know, our actions judge us by what we're doing with our funding to mayors across the country and to local authorities. So we've got £3 billion that we are funneling to local authorities for improvements to their bus network. We are also funding mayoral combined authorities through the Transport for City Regions funding to also improve their bus networks. What, generally speaking, I know the example that you have quoted to me is highly negative. The vast majority of conversations I have with directly elected mayors across the country are hugely supportive of the changes that we are bringing in through the Bus Services Act. So I could list you mayors across the country
the chair won't be happy.
who are wishing to pursue bus franchising. We've seen the rollout of new electric buses as well in lots of those city regions. And so I detect a lot of ambition. I'm just sad it's obviously not shared by everyone everywhere.
So moving on to local authority bus grant formulas. Yep. We think that you adopted one of the committee's recommendations and included rurality into the new formula. Obviously, that's alongside various other things such as deprivation, size, etc. Is there any way of finding out if any local authorities have received higher allocations than they would have done otherwise because specifically of that rurality point?
Joe may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is quite a difficult exercise to do because of the number of changes that we made to the bus funding formula this time round. And so to be able to extract out what an individual authority would have received in particular circumstances would, you know, had we not then done the deprivation weighting, for example. And so we haven't done a particular piece of work in the department to compare a before and after, but we did apply a 10% I can't even say this word, rurality rating, because it is important that we recognise the additional costs of operating bus services in rural areas. We've also introduced multi-year allocations as well, which has been welcomed by local authorities so that they've got more certainty of funding and can do better planning when it comes to routes and fares. But because of the number of changes we made, it is difficult to separate it out. But we're confident that there are a number of rural areas that will be receiving significantly more because of the changes we made.
The only thing I would add is obviously structurally under the last government we had competitive allocation of this sort of bus funding. That makes it particularly difficult to do a sort of apples and apples comparison of the change of the weighting and the new approach that's being taken.
You've mentioned a couple of times about the August scheme for free bus travel for young people as a cost of living measure. Is this just a cost of living policy or is it a transport policy as well?
So I think primarily it's about helping families with cost of living pressures this summer. You'll be aware it's part of a broader package that the Chancellor announced about VAT not being applicable on certain activities this summer. And so look, I think it is about just trying to help people given that the cost pressures that they're experiencing. Having said that, it may result in some people using the bus with their children who don't normally use the bus at the moment, and a positive experience on the bus this summer might yield them coming back to the bus in the autumn, which from a perspective of trying to grow bus usage and patronage is a good thing. So I think there could be positive consequences associated with this, as well as providing the immediate support on cost of living.
And when we were taking evidence about the integrated transport strategy, we heard that the other cost of living measure for transport, the £3 cap, was actually, according to the person who was giving the evidence, was in contradiction to having an integrated transport policy because it was one form of transport only. Do you see any contradiction in that?
Sorry, only one. So if you change buses, it's £6.
Yeah, and if you train from a bus to a train, it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, look, I think it's a positive measure. Could we do more? Potentially, but there would be additional cost associated with that. And so, bearing in mind the financial constraints that we're operating in, I think a £3 bus fare cap was the right thing to do so that people weren't experiencing massive jumps in the cost of their fare. I know that in some cities in the UK there's a sort of hopper bus fare that's in place. I don't think we're going to be in a position to roll something like that out across the country, but what I would say about our better connected integrated national transport strategy is that one of the key deliverables that we want to see from that is providing integrated ticketing in our main city region areas across bus and tram, and us as the Department for Transport enabling the rollout of that integrated ticketing by providing the back office technology that is needed to support it. Because one of the things that mayors in city regions say to us is that procuring our own integrated ticketing system is hugely complex. Some of the time we don't have the skills and capacity that we need to do it. I think it took Liverpool about 7 or 8 years. So we need to get the building blocks in place to enable integrated, ideally contactless ticketing across different modes in those big sort of towns and cities, and that's part of the Project Coral work that my department is leading on at the moment. So you need the technology there to do it. You would then also need the funding available to do it, and that's not something that I have available in this spending review to do, sadly.
And then in Alan Milburn's recent report on people not in education and training, it suggested that one barrier for some young people getting there was transport, that actually reduced costs on public transport could well help them. Are you having any discussions with the Treasury whereby reducing costs for young people might actually overall be of benefit to the taxpayer?
So I'm acutely aware for young people who are wanting weekend jobs, perhaps their first experience of a job. You know, you've got villages on the outskirts of towns and cities across the country where on a Saturday or a Sunday there might not be a bus running at all. In the next spending review that we will be going through in 2027, I would like to have an open conversation with colleagues across government about what might be possible in terms of supporting young people into employment, because I do recognise it is a barrier at the moment. We, you know, in terms of the settlement that we got for this spending review, I was really pleased that we could maintain that £3 bus fare cap. I think that's a good outcome. Is my ambition bigger? Yes. Will the public finances allow it? I don't know. Will that be a conversation?
Isn't that kind of the point? This might be a measure that could improve the public finances overall. Are we not just thinking of this as a cost to the Department of Transport rather than a benefit to the nation as a whole?
We absolutely evaluate when we're advising ministers any intervention on the whole impact it can have on the public finances and the benefits.
Well,
so we would take all of those.
In your conversations with colleagues, you have this committee's support. We recommended free travel for under 22s because of the evidence we received of the overall benefit that does to, particularly to the more rural and isolated communities and areas of high deprivation. So good luck, and you have our support. Great. 2 quick sets of questions and then we're done.
Okay.
Right.
In response
Jacob.
to the Streetworks report, you said that you'd be working with the MHCLG on coordination of streetworks, particularly around new developments. Could you update us on that work?
Yeah, so we are working with MHCLG to add a new section to a document that's called the Code of Practice for the Coordination of Streetworks, and we want to set out very clear expectations for utilities and new housing developments, and we hope to publish that new Code of Practice next year.
Right, thank you. Rebecca,
Great.
we're now going to the sea.
Yes. So the Regulating for Growth Bill has been announced in the King's Speech, which is looking obviously at tackling the issues around marine autonomy, which is particularly important in my constituency down in Devon. I welcome the news around the sandbox phase for testing. However, how long will that phase, once enabled by the bill, last for? And can you provide reassurance to the industry, particularly around defence, that at some point the experiment pilot phase will end and a permanent regulatory framework will be introduced to speed up innovation? And as a side note, do you have any idea when the bill is likely to be coming forward? Because my letter to the Leader of the House thanked me for my support and sidestepped that particularly important question.
I'm afraid I can't give you a date for when the bill will be coming forward. It's a DBT bill, but we're working very closely on it with them, not least because we do think that there's huge potential in our maritime industries for growth and for investment. And you're right to highlight the potential of autonomous shipping in that. I'm hoping that Joe might have been searching for an answer on how long the sandbox phase would last for, and I don't know whether we've got any information on that.
I don't.
But we might be able to write to you in more detail on it.
Yeah, but I think you say we're delighted that this was chosen as one of the examples and that will be taken forward through the legislation, but we can follow up on the specific question about that length of period.
Great. And if you have any intel on which minister at DBT is taking it, I'd be very grateful to have
We can
that
certainly provide
helpful.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all for you, Rebecca. Quick question, quite niche question. Steph, but
Coast Guard agents,
very important.
has announced that the rescue officers are going to move to a volunteer with expenses model, which means that hourly remuneration for training and operational activity will cease. This is particularly important in my coastal community. One of your ministers told the House that government was committed to ensuring volunteers were at the heart of our seafaring nation. But the agency has stated that it will provide future strength and resilience, although many local serving officers believe the opposite may be true. Would you commit to publishing the evidence behind that conclusion?
Sorry, just repeat the question. I got distracted slightly. Sorry.
So we're changing to an expenses-only model.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned this is going to impact upon the volunteer capacity, particularly in coastal communities, but all coastal communities. There was a claim that this will improve and protect the future strength and resilience of the service. I'm particularly concerned that the opposite will be true.
Is it helpful if I start with the reason for the changes before the Secretary of State
case, which is
continues? Yes, so the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency lost an employment tribunal and the Court of Appeal upheld that judgment in January this year, and that means the volunteer model cannot continue. So it wasn't a choice that the agency had to continue, and so they've had to look at the sort of legal and operational implications and how we preserve and protect that volunteer model, as you say. After looking at it, they've decided that the sort of way ahead is to move to an expenses paid model rather than hourly remuneration. We know lots of Coast Guards who do such brilliant work for us, as we saw on the bank holiday weekend, with all those very difficult issues and rescues. You know, this wouldn't have been their choice, but the agency cannot continue with the current model, though, because of the Court of Appeal judgment.
We can't run emergency services on the basis of goodwill, so surely paying them is the only sustainable option.
Well, the vast majority of Coast Guard rescue officers will do a few hours each week alongside their main job. And actually, you know, the flexibility for those individuals to be able to do it in that way is quite important. We certainly don't want people to be out of pocket in volunteering. We know that the primary motivation for a lot of people who volunteer their time in this way is about making a contribution to keeping our sea and our coastal communities safe. We couldn't continue with the model of hourly remuneration given the Court of Appeal judgment.
Well, the rate was the issue, not the concept.
Yeah, and so we have decided to move to a system where it's expenses only, and the MCA has done a lot of engagement with its staff in recent months, and the proposal is to move to this position in September.
I understand that.
And the leadership of the MCA have offered to speak to any MPs who are representing coastal communities and beyond who want to talk about this. What we want to do is make sure that we continue to treat our volunteers fairly and with respect. It has been made difficult by the Court of Appeal judgment, but we believe we found a reasonable way through this.
I guess I would just gently say that the claim by the MCA is that it will improve the future strength and resilience of the service. I would very much like to see the evidence behind that statement, and we could have a separate conversation about how we deal with volunteers. There are, of course, alternative models like the RNLI as well, but I'm really keen to see the evidence that this will protect and enhance the future resilience and reliability of the service.
Let me take that away and talk to Virginia McVeigh, who's the Chief Executive of the MCA for you.
I'd really appreciate that.
It's an important issue to those areas. I know your constituency is affected. Finally, we just want to go quickly back to roads. Lawrence, you've got an important question.
Thank you. And it feels appropriate to finish with a question about potholes. The government is funding, I think, £7 billion for local road repairs. However, as vehicles get heavier and extreme weather becomes more frequent, it does feel like we're in a risk of getting trapped in a cycle where funding increases each year, but so does the backlog because there are more potholes arising than there used to be. A number of technological solutions are being promoted, from new machinery to different mixes of fillers to sealants and graphene tape. What is the department doing to evaluate and promote the most efficient means of repairing roads to local authorities? Because it certainly seems like an issue in my area that there will be a repair, but it'll be poor quality, and very, very quickly the original problem will arise.
Yeah, look, I don't think that money is the only solution here. We've got to get better at the way in which we're using the money that is available. And so we do provide guidance for local authorities about how to use an evidence-led approach about the interventions that are going to be best. Some of the time patching a pothole will not be as cost-effective as doing preventative road resurfacing on a stretch of the road. We're also funding a programme called Live Labs 2, which is working with local authorities to enable them to trial more innovative methods when it comes to highways maintenance. So that might be about testing new materials, new methods, new technologies in the real world, and that's a £30 million programme that we run. And the final thing to say on this is that, unlike previous governments, we have withheld a proportion of the money that highways authorities get in order that they demonstrate to us a certain number of things being true in their local area. For example, that they do spend all the money that DfT gives them for highways maintenance on highways maintenance, but also that they can evidence that their members of staff have undergone professional development to make sure that they are learning about innovative uses of new technology and new machinery. And so, you know, that's about a third that we will withhold until we get evidence back from the local authorities about how they are using the money that we do give them to best effect, and we'll be requiring them to publish a transparency report this autumn so that everyone can see how local authorities are using that money.
Have the results of those trials at a local level been looked at and collated within the department? I mean, ideally we don't want local authorities to be constantly reinventing the wheel.
And what we need to do is make sure that we're sharing best practice as well. And so that is embedded into the Live Labs programme.
Great. Thank you. That concludes today's session. Thank you very much for your time and for answering our questions. And if you do feel you want to add anything, please do write to us with anything you feel you haven't covered in your answers this morning. That concludes today's meeting.